What's up, guys? I'm nobody special, and I am very proud today. I have Mario from maneco64 is with us. Mario, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, and you, Jack?
I'm doing great, and I'm sitting here just dumbfounded because I don't know if it is divine providence or just my dumb luck that we set up this interview last week, and it just happens to come a few hours after what will probably end up being some very historic action taken by the European Central Bank. And I wanted to bring you on to talk about central bank actions going on all over the world. And then, wham, right before we get together, the Eurozone, we get the first rate hike in 11 years, and it's a big one, 50 basis points, double what they forecast. And we get this transmission protection instrument. Fancy word salad coming out of the ECB,
Yeah.
which I think is fancy talk for a lot more money printing. So there's a lot to unpack going on right now. Let's start with the rate hike, I guess. What are your thoughts? We're going to share my screen here. Taking a look right here. This is inflation in the eurozone right now, and finally got that rate hike, even though it's been 2 years of steady inflation increases. They finally get around to that.
Yeah, it was a surprise, even though they had talked a few weeks ago of maybe a 0.5% rate hike. But I think people got complacent because of what's happening in Italy politically. And so it was kind of a surprise. And it's the first time since Jean-Claude Trichet was the president of the ECB, which is even before Mario Draghi, and the first time they raised rates by 50 basis points uh, since 2000. That was even before they brought the euro banknotes and coins into circulation. So to me, it just shows that they're way behind the curve. And yeah, um, we can talk about the Italian situation as well if you like.
So
And
speaking of behind the curve, on this chart we're looking at right here, this shows the funds rates of the various central banks around the world. All right. Now you can see here's the Bank of Canada way out on top right now. They've been hiking the hardest, followed by the Fed, followed by the Bank of England, right? They've been on a tightening schedule since late last year, early this year. All the way down here at the bottom in blue, there's the ECB, and then today it's not reflected in this chart. Today the ECB jumped up, big rate hike all the way to 0.0%.
yeah, it's
So
still zero.
yeah,
Yeah, and the thing is, it's still zero. The prices are rising at almost double digits, so it means that um, it's still advantageous to borrow money because the money is becoming or the currency is becoming worthless by 9% still. So I don't think it makes much difference. And the fact that they announced this new TPI thing for Italy just goes to show that. They can't really tighten policy.
yeah, that's interesting because this is a very tightening move. We'll call it tightening for the ECB. This is tightening, right? Raising rates to zero. Like, okay, we'll call it tightening. It's a raise. But at the same time, we get this transmission protection instrument, which, well, this is basically QE, is it not? Which would be a very loose monetary move. So tight and loose at the same time. What's going
I
on over there?
so yeah, I think it's actually kind of a yield curve control, but in terms of the spread between the periphery yields and the German yield, the Bund yield. So it's a little different than what the BOJ is doing with a 10-year yield, where they're saying, we're going to buy as many JGBs that we need to keep the yield below 25 basis points. I think what they're doing here is saying we're going to buy as many BTPs or Italian government bonds, and maybe even Greek or others, to keep them from rising quicker than the German yield. So it's kind of complicated, but basically, yes, it's not really pure QE because unless the market challenges the ECB by selling Italian bonds and other bonds, the ECB doesn't have to do it. But I'm sure they will challenge the ECB. I noticed this afternoon after the ECB announced this, that Italian government bond yields actually made a daily high, intraday high I think around 3.75. They've come off a little bit right now, but I see this as the ECB trying to placate investors and the markets by saying, "Look, we raised rates. We know inflation is out of control," uh, but at the same time, they're doing this, and so they want to have their cake and eat it. So yeah, they're really cornered, and so are all the other central banks. I
Right.
don't think the Fed has a chance in hell really to do the kind of QT they're planning to do. Their balance sheet, if anything, keeps rising, but not that much, but it's still rising. And I wouldn't put it past them to be doing things that we don't see. And maybe we'll come to that later in terms of what central banks kind of deceiving the public.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of whispers about that. That yeah, they say they're tightening, but looking at what yields have done, right? Interest rates, at least here in the states, they've come down sharply since June 14th, and June 14th was one day before the 75 basis point rate hike that we got from the Fed, and it was one day before the first short-dated treasuries rolled off the Fed's balance sheet. So one of these things is not like the other, right? Quantitative tightening plus raising interest rates, and yet yields are coming down. Somebody with very deep pockets is out there buying US treasuries right now to offset what the Fed is telling us they're doing. So it does seem a little sus to a lot of people what interest rates are doing.
Yeah,
Now, go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, I think the Bank of Japan is helping that, keeping the Japanese yen very weak, and also their rates very low with yield curve control. What it does, it doesn't just encourage Japanese investors to buy U.S. Treasuries and European government bonds. It encourages people in the West to borrow for nothing in Japan and then buy Treasuries that are yielding more. So it could be a little bit of that, and that wouldn't be happening if Kuroda wasn't going mad with his monetary policy. The other thing as well, I think the yield curve in the U.S. now is pointing to a recession, and we saw today data from the U.S. I think it was the Philly Fed, or
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
the Philly Fed came out
big
really
surprise
weak.
down.
Yeah, so I think it's the first time since 2020 that we've seen 2 months of negative numbers, so it doesn't look very good.
Now you touched on a couple of things there. You had mentioned if investors don't fight the ECB or at least, protest via dumping Italian debt in response to this, which is kind of like what we're seeing in Japan, right? They're calling them bond vigilantes in Japan, which is investors selling the assets that the BOJ has said will buy at artificially inflated prices. And you also kind of touched a little bit, it almost sounded a little like the dollar milkshake theory, where if yields are going to be suppressed elsewhere in the world, well, I might as well hide in US dollars. And maybe that's contributing to the US yields coming down. Is that my understanding that correct? Or
I don't. I'm not a proponent of the dollar milkshake theory, but I think what it does is the Japanese investors buy not just dollar assets; they buy other government bonds, maybe even some Italian bonds because they have higher yields than the JGB. So that's it's called the yen carry trade. And but I think if you look at the 10-year JGB yield, it seems to be touching every day that 24, 25. That means that investors they're not really confident about buying JGBs, because if they were, maybe the yield would be going down to 10 or 0. So the flip side to that, I think the what will happen is that the yen will weaken so much that the Bank of Japan is going to be forced to turn around and abandon this policy, just like the Swiss National Bank abandoned the peg to the euro some years ago, and that's going to be really ground shaking for the whole world government bond market, and we could see yields spike everywhere, U.S. included, if the BOJ has to abandon yield curve control.
now, when the TPI first came out, this morning, or for me, it was this morning. Uh, you mentioned that there was initially a blowout in these Italian bonds and German bond spreads, right? The gap between the yield of the Italian bond versus the German Bund, and that to me was investors saying we don't really believe this TPI has a lot of teeth, is what I interpreted that as. And I've heard some or read some criticism on Twitter of people saying that this was really just word salad from the central bank, and that the way it's written, Italy wouldn't qualify for this because there's a lot of language in here saying that they need to comply with some fiscal framework and sustainability of debt levels, things that Italy doesn't qualify for. But there was one sentence in here that really, under the eligibility, that stuck out at me, saying these criteria will be an input. They're saying "and it" like as if one of many inputs into the governing council's decision making, and will be dynamically adjusted to the unfolding risks and conditions to be addressed. And when I see dynamically adjusted, that to me is the ECB softening the language to say we'll do whatever we want, whether they meet these requirements or not. Am I reading
Yeah,
this wrong? Or
you're right. I mean, this is just them covering themselves at the same time, leaving themselves an escape exit. Uh, they will abandon all these rules, and they have abandoned these rules for forever. The 3% deficit to GDP rule. None of these countries are following that anymore. Prior to COVID, I would say Germany and the Netherlands, they actually were running budget surpluses. Germany's debt to GDP was like below 60%, but that's gone out the window now. And yes, maybe the reason why Italian yields are still quite high as we speak here. I see the 10-year is at almost 3.69%. The high after the ECB announcement was 375, and the low to the previous close was 347. So I think the market is also concerned about the political uncertainty and chaos in Italy. And I think we need to look at the political side, because we could see countries and in the north, Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, countries that are uh, quite frugal and run a tight fiscal ship, complain about this, because why should they keep bailing out Italy and other countries? And I think that could be a problem.
I mean, this is basically a transfer of wealth via inflation from the Northern European citizens to the Southern European citizens. And I'd imagine the folks in the North might have something to say about that. Um,
I think so too, and it's been happening since Mario Draghi said in 2012 that they do whatever it takes.
it's interesting. The same Mario Draghi, who now not doing so hot politically, is he? Is this
No,
just
no,
a
but
revolving door of bankers? I mean, is
y- yeah, but it shows, I think, that they're so concerned about the Euro project that they had to bring him in to keep the boats, the ship from sinking, and now he's gonna he's left. He's gonna leave the ship. So it will be interesting to see what happens.
this also pretty much makes the ECB a kingmaker politically, doesn't it? If they're setting up these very lax standards about whether they will bail out a country financially or not, I mean, is it really, can they just decide, hey, we don't like whoever replaces Mario Draghi politically, so we're not going to roll this out until we get somebody in there who toes the party line for us, and then we'll bail out his country. I mean, the potential for abuse here seems amazing to me.
Yes, I think it happened in Greece when Varoufakis was the finance minister. They elected the I forgot the prime minister that they elected, but they were saying, "Oh, we're gonna default. We're gonna leave the euro," and then all of a sudden they just switched and they toed the line. We'll have to see what it happens in Italy if the nationalist party, I forgot the name of the party, but I think it's a lady that's running that. They are quite powerful now. Who knows? They could say we want to leave the the euro. We want the lira back, and that would really be uh, something to behold, I guess, in terms of crisis.
Now that's interesting because there's another topic in this that I wanted to get to, but it's 2 questions away. I saw this in purchase parameters, and this is another thing that really, it was an OMG moment when I saw this, because they slipped this in at the end of parameters. Purchases of private sector securities could be considered if appropriate. So what they just did is they just granted themselves a blank check to go out and buy anything, right? There's
Yeah,
there's no
they could
qualifiers
buy
here.
corporate bonds, like, for if, Italian banks are failing or whatever. It's not just, government bonds.
Yeah, I mean, corporate bonds, let's say hypothetically, a very large German natural gas utility that is struggling with solvency issues right now. Could this come into play with the energy debate that's going on within Europe right now? And I call it a debate. It's a clown show. But what's happening with energy? I mean, is this paving the way for energy bailouts via this mechanism? Is that one possible outcome here?
Well, the problem with the energy situation is that no amount of, uh, euro reserves are out of thin air is gonna solve the problem of, energy supply. So I'm not sure that
That's right.
whether
They can
it's worth saving, an energy company that can't, get a hold of natural gas or whatever.
You can't print methane. That's right.
Yeah.
Um, and that does bring me to another topic here, on this subject, because I saw this. This is from Javier Blas, who is the head commodities correspondent over at Bloomberg. I may have gotten his title wrong, but he's the commodities guy at Bloomberg, saying North versus South 2.0. Spain, Greece, and Portugal, i.e., the pigs, noticeably absent Italy, reject the EU call for 15% cuts in natural gas consumption to help Germany. The Spanish energy minister clearly aiming at Berlin. Contrary to other countries, Spain hasn't been living beyond its means in energy terms. Now, on a day where the North is preparing to bail out the South monetarily, namely, this is Italy, but Italy, I tend to see them used not interchangeably, but usually accompanying by Portugal, Greece, and Spain. So while the northern countries are getting ready for a monetary bailout, the southern countries, which don't get nearly as cold in the wintertime, are saying we're not going to embrace any form of energy austerity to the benefit of Germany. So this seems like unusual friction between some of the EU members right now.
Yeah, so much for gratitude, I would say. I had seen the headline that Greece, was saying that, and, yeah, uh, this is a big problem. It just goes to show, that, the European Union project, especially the euro, single currency, is something that will probably not survive. I went to Italy last week, and I was talking to a lady, a taxi driver, and I asked her, "What do you think about the EU?" And she said, maybe having cooperation for trade and defense is good, but she said we can't have the same currency. We're too different culturally, and yeah, it's just a straitjacket also on Italy. And I'm not saying it's good to inflate and have a weak currency, but that's how Italy used to operate before the euro. And even though they had inflation and high interest rates, at least their economy wasn't stagnating like it has in the last 20 years.
Yeah, it's kind of like the metaphor, right? You can be really good friends with somebody, and then turns out he's a lousy roommate, because he has habits that you don't like, or he lives a different way. You can get along great with trade, you can have the military alliance, but when you end up sharing the same set of rules, you share the same currency, and it tends to cause problems. And we're kind of seeing this with the monetary policy now, with the energy policy, and it affects different people differently. So I'm tend to agree with you there.
Yeah, we could end up having the euro might survive, and people might say, "What do you mean?" Well, it could survive as just a northern European currency, and then you'd have Italy going back to the lira, Spain to the Spanish peseta, and Greece to back to the drachma, and so on.
Wow. Which would, you know, weaken the euro if, just thinking out loud here, that would probably weaken the euro. Although right now they're weakening the euro to keep these countries in the alliance. So
Mm.
maybe that
I,
would actually
I
strengthen it.
think
I
it
don't
would
know.
actually strengthen the euro.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the trick here is if you want to, and I don't recommend this, but if you want to hold euro government uh, bonds, buy the German government bonds, because if there's a breakup of the euro, or even if Germany goes back to the Deutschmark, those bonds will still be there. Yeah, make sure you don't. And also, I guess if you have banknotes, euro banknotes, make sure they're the German ones.
Interesting. Now there's something else I wanted to get into. I was going through your channel and you put out a video yesterday that was really, really impressive. And I took a screenshot here. This one's a little hard to see, but you did an interesting experiment. Tell me about this experiment that you just did on your channel and what you found.
Well, it was by accident because I did a video, another video earlier yesterday, and I used the Bank of England inflation calculator, and I've used it for the last few years because it's really good. It goes back to 1200, believe it or not.
Wow.
But I noticed when I was using this calculator yesterday on the right hand side, on yeah, that the numbers seem different from the last time I used it last year. So I after I finished that video, I checked my my videos that I did last year. I was trying to find that video, and I found it from June last year. And what I discovered is that the Bank of England has changed, tweaked, or fudged the numbers now, and they're saying inflation has been a lot lower than it was. So, and I think the government, unfortunately, is going to do the same thing to try to hide the inflation. And so, as you can see, I was looking at 1914 to 2020. Last year was saying that you needed 118 pounds um, to have the purchasing power of a pound in 1914, and now it's saying that you only need 78.53. So they've lowered the rate of inflation, the calculation. And I also looked at from 97 to 2020, because 97 was when the Bank of England was given independence by the Labour government, and they were set a target of 2% CPI, or inflation. And last June as well, I checked, and 97 to 2020, and the average inflation, annual inflation since they got independence was 2.7. And so they're not meeting their target, but magically now they are. It's down to 1.9. And they could, their argument would be, well, the government is switched the numbers, they adjusted because it's a better number. But it's very suspicious. Why didn't they do that 2 3 years ago? Well, they're doing it now because they're losing control, and the Bank of England and the government want to say, oh, look, prior to COVID and Ukraine, everything was fine. There was no inflation. Look, we kept inflation below target. But that's I mean, I don't like to use the word, but it's a lie.
So you entered all the same criteria, right? And I'm looking at the numbers right now. Same
Yeah.
year, €1 versus €1, same time frame,
A pound,
97 to
yeah, a
2000. Oh,
pound.
I'm sorry, 1 pound. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, and you did it a year ago, and you got 1.86 pounds. And then you did it this year, and you got 1.55. All other parameters are equal. And you did it not just for 97, you did it for 1914. Same thing, you got a much lower figure now. So, in a shocking turn of events, and this is my surprised face, they have revised their calculations to make inflation look less severe today versus a year ago. Is that am I summarizing that
Yeah,
accurately?
and less severe for the last 25 years as well, which is, revising history. And I would say that the next CPI or inflation numbers that we get from the UK government, even though they might seem high, they will probably be lower than they actually should be. So, I mean, they've done the same in the States with if you look at shadow stats, they've changed the methodology. That's what they always do. And to make it seem like it's less.
Absolutely. I mean, the government here in the States and I'm sure overseas, they're incentivized to understate inflation because all of their expenses, cost of living adjustments for employees, veterans benefits, food stamps, it's all keyed to CPI. So if they understate CPI, their expenses rise less, and yet their income rises because they collect taxes on the increase in the sale value of all the assets that are out there being bought and sold as those rise with the regular inflation rate and their expenses go up slower. So the government has a financial incentive to lie to us about inflation, and you just caught them red-handed. I mean, that is blatant. You can't argue with a screenshot.
No.
Well, Mario, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. And again, it was just either dumb luck or divine intervention that it just so happens that we this conversation lands on the day when the ECB is taking all these drastic steps. I think we'll probably be talking about this a lot in the future about this TPI and about the sudden rate increase cycle at the ECB. We'll see how long this lasts because I am in the same boat as you. I think eventually they're going to be forced to pivot, whether it's sooner or later is anybody's guess, but sooner or later they always pivot, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I don't think it will be too long before they do. And yeah, it was really great talking with you, Jack. And thanks for inviting me.
Always a pleasure, Mario. You're welcome back anytime. And by the way, you were the first guest in the history of this channel. So it's great to have you back. And thank you for being my first guest on my channel.
Great.
Folks, it's maneco64. I'm going to put a link down in the description below. Check out Mario's channel. He does a fantastic job. He covers precious metals, central banks, the inflation story with a particular European focus that's very rare on YouTube. So I highly recommend that channel. Any final words, Mario?
Uh, Not really. I mean, just batten down the hatches, keep stacking, and don't believe anything the central bankers tell you.
Sound advice, sir. Very much. All right, folks. Until next time, live small and dream big.